And we're continuing with the second chapter of Black Hearts in Battersea by Joan Aiken. I wonder if you could hear the spine on this old paperback begin to fall apart as I was reading the last chapter. It's such an old book. So Simon has got himself a job as a blacksmith starting at 5 o'clock and is on his way to the art academy. And foolishly, he told Ditto, thinking that it was not an issue, that the principal of the academy's name is Furnace. Simon felt somewhat nervous as he approached the academy, but was encouraged to find that on a nearer view it presented a less imposing aspect. Some ingenious spirit had hit on the notion of suspending clotheslines between the Grecian columns supporting the roof, and from these dangled a great many socks, shirts, and other garments, while all round the marble fountain in front of the academy knelt or squatted young persons of both sexes busily engaged in washing various articles of apparel. Simon approached a young man who was scrubbing a pair of red socks with a bar of yellow soap and said, "Can you please tell me where I shall find Dr. Furnace?" The young man rinsed his socks, held them up, sniffed them, glanced at the sun, and said, "About 10 o'clock, is it? He'll be having breakfast in his room on the first floor." He sniffed his socks again, remarked that they still smelt of paint, and set to rubbing them once more. Simon walked on, wondering if the young man kept his paint in his socks. In the doorway, a sudden recollection hit him. Paint! That was the smell that had seemed so familiar in the top room of Mrs. Twite's. Of course it was paint. Then Simon stopped, assailed by suspicion. Was that why Mrs. Twite had been scrubbing with bath brick? To remove the smell of paint? Why? Pondering this, Simon sat down on the first convenient object he found, a stone statue of a lion, half finished, to unravel the matter a little further. Ditto said Dr. Field had not been at the Twites', but the rooms were as he had described them. The address was as he had given it, and the room smelt of paint, which suggested that he had occupied it. Perhaps, Simon thought, perhaps he had fallen out with the Twites, had had something stolen, or found the house too dirty, or objected to being woken at 1 a.m. by Hanoverian songs. He had complained, taken his leave, and moved away. The Twites, annoyed at losing a lodger, had contrived an elaborate pretense that no Dr. Field had ever lived with them. Somehow, Simon found it hard to believe this. For one thing, Dr. Field was far from fussy, and provided he was furnished with privacy and a good light for painting, was unlikely to object if his neighbors practiced cannibalism or played the bass drum all night, so long as they let him alone. And secondly, why should the Twites bother to make such a pretense about a trivial matter? Half a dozen people, neighbors, patients, local tradesmen, would be able to give their story the lie. Then it occurred to Simon that he had not heard what Mr. or Mrs. Twite had to say. He had only heard Ditto's version. Perhaps the whole mystery was just her nonsense. And when he got back that night, he would be handed a piece of paper with Dr. Field's address on it. Cheered by this reasonable notion, Simon stood up and crossed the entrance hall. A large double flight of marble stairs faced him, and between them stood a statue of a man in a huge wig, dressed in knee breeches and a painter's smock. He held a marble paintbrush and was engaged in painting a marble picture on a marble easel. The back of the easel bore an inscription, Marcus Riviere, 1759 to 1819, founded this academy. Simon noticed, when he was high enough up the stairs to be able to look over the marble gentleman's shoulder, that someone had painted a picture of a pink pig wearing a blue bow on the marble canvas. Opposite the top of the stairs he saw a door labeled Principal. Rather timidly, he knocked on it, and an impatient voice shouted, "Allons, entrez!" Walking in, Simon found himself in a medium-sized room that was overpoweringly warm, and smelt strongly of garlic and coffee and turpentine. The warmth came from 2 braziers full of glowing charcoal, on one of which a kettle steamed briskly. The room was so untidy, littered with stacks of canvases, baskets of fruit, wood carvings, strings of onions hanging from the ceiling, easels with pictures on them, statues, that at first Simon did not see the little man who had told him to come in. But after a moment, The same irascible voice said, "Ah, Ben, shut the door, if you please, and declare yourself." "Are you Dr. Furness, please, sir?" Simon said hesitantly. "Furneaux, if you please, Furneaux. I cannot endure the English pronunciation." Dr. Furness, or Furneaux, was hardly more than 3 feet 6 inches high, and extraordinarily whiskery. As he rose up from behind his desk, he reminded Simon irresistibly of a prawn. His whiskers waved, his hands waved, a pair of snapping black eyes took in every inch of Simon, from his dusty shoes to the kitten's face poking inquisitionally out of his jacket. And so, Dr. Furneaux said impatiently. "Who may you be?" "If you please, my name is Simon, and I believe Dr. Field spoke about me." "Ah, yes, Gabriel Field, a boy named Simon. Attendez." Dr. Furneaux waved his antenna interpretively, darted over to a cupboard, returned with a coffee pot, tipped coffee into it from a blue paper bag, poured in hot water, produced cups from a tea chest, and sugar from another blue paper bag. "Now we wait a moment. A boy named Simon, yes. Gabriel Field mentioned you, yes. In a moment I shall see what you can do. Are you hungry?" he said, looking sternly at Simon. "Take the bread off the brazier, there, blockhead, and find some plates and some butter in the brown jar, of course." As Simon, bewildered, looked uncertainly about him, the brown earthenware jar resembled something from the Arabian Nights, and could easily have held Ali Baba and a couple of thieves. "So now we eat," said Dr. Furneaux, breaking 8 inches off a loaf shaped like a rolling pin and handing it to Simon. "I will pour the coffee in a moment. Tell me about my good friend, Dr. Gabriel Field. How is it with him?" "Dr. Field," Simon stammered absently, taking a large bite of the crisp bread which flew into crumbs all round him. "But haven't you seen him? I thought he would be here." "Not since my jour de fête in July," said Dr. Furneaux, carefully pouring coffee into 2 cups and handing one to Simon. But he said you were to live with him? Are you not, then?" "He seems to have moved. He is not at the address he sent." "Chose Aziz Antoinette," Dr. Furneaux muttered to himself. "Can Dr. Field be in debt, escaping his creditors, or in prison? He would have told me." "He wrote inviting me to come and live with him, sir," Simon said. "He would have said if he was planning to move." "Well, no doubt he has been called away on the private affairs. He will return. One thing is certain, he will come back here. Now, you have eaten? The little one, he has eaten too?" Dr. Furneaux nodded benevolently at the kitten, which was licking up some crumbs of bread and butter from the dusty floor. "It is well. To work, then. I wish to see you draw." He handed Simon a stick of charcoal. "Yes, sir." Simon took the charcoal with a trembling hand. "Where shall I draw?" Dr. Furneaux's whiskered gaze roved round the room. There was not a clean canvas, nor an empty space in it. "Draw on that wall," the doctor said, waving at the wall to his right, which was invitingly bare and white. "All over it, sir?" "Of course." "What shall I draw?" "Oh, anything you have seen in the last few days." As usual, when Simon started drawing, he was wrapped away into a world of his own. People knocked and entered and consulted Dr. Furneaux, waited for assistance, went away again. Some of them stared at Simon, others took no notice. Dr. Furneaux himself came and went, darting out to conduct a class, or back to criticize the efforts of a private pupil. At intervals he made more coffee, from time to time offered a cup of it, or a piece of bread, apple, grape, or sausage to Simon. He ignored Simon's work, preferring apparently to wait till it was finished. Toward noon, a boy a little younger than Simon came in, escorted by a tall, thin man. "Mon Dieu!" Dr. Furneaux groaned to himself at the sight of them. Then he stood and waved them forward. "My dear young Justin, my dearest friend's grandson, and the sage Mr. Buckle. Enchanté de vous voir. Mr. Buckle, do yourself the kindness to sit down. Let us see what you have been working on this week, my dear Justin." The boy did not speak, but hunched his shoulders and looked depressed, while the man addressed as Mr. Buckle, a sandy-haired, pale-eyed individual, dressed in rusty black, laid a small pile of drawings on the desk. Neither the man nor the boy took any notice of Simon, who observed that the boy looked positively ill with apprehension as Dr. Furneaux examined his work. He was a sickly-looking lad, very richly dressed, but the olive-green velvet of his jacket went badly with his pale, spotty cheeks, and the plumed hat which he had taken off revealed lank, stringy hair. It was plain that he wished himself 1,000 miles away. Dr. Furneaux looked slowly and carefully through the pile of drawings. Once or twice he seemed about to burst out with some remark, but restrained himself when he reached the last. However, his feelings became too much for him, and he exploded with rage. How can you bring such stuff to show me, Jean-Jacques Furneaux, principal of Zurière Academy? This is what I think of these abominable drawings. With considerable difficulty he tore the whole batch across and across, scattering pieces of paper all about him, his whiskers quivering, his eyes snapping with rage. Although so small, he was a formidable spectacle. The boy, Justin, seemed ready to melt into the ground with terror as bits of paper flew like autumn leaves. Simon watched with awe and apprehension as if Dr. Furneaux was so severe with a familiar pupil, grandson of an old friend, what was his own reception to be? The only person who thoroughly enjoyed the scene was the kitten, who darted about and chased the fluttering scraps of paper around Dr. Furneaux's feet. The sight of him appeared to calm the fiery little principal. He stopped hissing and stamping, stared at the kitten, snapped his fingers, took several deep breaths, and walked briskly 2 or 3 times up and down the room, neatly avoiding all the obstacles. At last he said, I have been too harsh. I do not mean to alarm you, my dear boy. No, I hope I treat my best friend's grandson better than that. But there must be a painter hidden in the grandson of Marius Rivere. We shall wrench him out. N'est-ce pas? Now, you shall draw something simple. His eye roamed about the room and lit on the kitten. You shall draw that cat? Of the most simple. No, here. He swept everything, plates, bread, papers, and ink off his desk in disorder, found a stack of clean paper, and beckoned to Justin. Here, my dear boy, here is charcoal, here is crayon. Now draw. I shall return in 2 hours' time. Come, my dear Mr. Buckle, Justin will be easier if we leave him alone. He took the arm of Mr. Buckle, who moved reluctantly toward the door. Who is that? He asked sourly, pointing to the legs of Simon, who was lying on his stomach behind the Arabian Nights jar, drawing cobblestones. That? Dr. Furneaux shrugged. Nobody, a boy from nowhere. He will not disturb Justin. His mind is engrossed in drawing. The door closed behind them. Simon felt sorry for Justin. It seemed unreasonable to expect the boy to be a painter just because his grandfather had been one and founded the academy. People surely did not always take after their grandfathers. Perhaps